My name's Pastor Rebecca Craig. I am a pastor in the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, and I just wrote a book called Once Upon a Nightmare Through the Looking Glass of Narcissistic Abuse, and that gets released on May 28th. I'm very excited. Yay.
Yay!
my first book, even though I have a journalism degree and have been writing for I don't know how long, it's the first time I've really attempted getting something published.
That's amazing.
Yeah, before being a pastor, I actually used to work for Disney Animation and story development. So, yeah.
Yes. Your story. Oh, I could not wait until today. It's so amazing.
Well, hit me with your, with your thoughts and questions on that story.
Oh my gosh. First of all, you're an amazing writer. I found it so easy to read. It was so funny. There were so many parts where I just laughed out loud. I was like, it's relatable. I
enjoy hearing that because I don't consider myself a comedic writer. So to hear that you found it funny, actually, I'm like, oh, that wasn't what I was expecting, but cool.
There were funny parts, especially the relatable part. There was a part where you're sitting at a bar. I was like, okay, so you're like, I'm an introvert, so I should probably get out and have some social interaction. And your choice was sitting at a bar reading.
I know.
Drinking wine. I was like, that is so me. I laughed so hard.
Where do you go that I'm actually out in public, but I don't have to be around a ton of people,
Absolutely.
So
100%.
Evening
where I can still be alone,
Chicago.
but with other people.
In old Chicago. That was so funny to me. Yeah, great.
And,
so,
I wonder why I'm single. That's
right. Yeah, because that was definitely me when I was trying to date too. I was like, it reminds me of this scene, and I think the movie's Hitch with Will Smith, and she's sitting there, glasses, and he's like, you're obviously sitting here not wanting to be hit on. You got under 3-inch heels. You're sitting here with your glasses on, reading, whatever. I'm like, yeah, don't bother me.
I want to go meet people, but don't talk to me.
Not really. No, I don't. I just want to sit here and people watch. Right, I don't really want anybody to talk to me. So great.
That actually sounds delightful.
Of course,
I know.
My favorite part of that, though, is when the guy starts swearing at me, and the bartender behind the bar, just the look on her face was she was like, she tells you she's a pastor, and your response is to swear at her?
Right. Right. So the story is this trucker comes up to you, right? He's trying to hit on you, buys you a drink.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the story is that again, I go into this bar because I'm like, I really ought to get out more. I haven't, I'm being a pastor is a very isolating kind of job.
Yeah.
So if you want to meet people outside of your church, you have to go do other things. So I was like, I'm in this small town in relatively small town in Nebraska, where, should I go to meet other kinds of people? So I'm like, I'll go to this bar at Old Chicago with a book, because I was working on my sermon for the weekend. And there is a trucker in there who comes up, hits on me, buys me a drink, and starts, talking. And I'm just kind of sitting there like, okay. And nothing against truckers. I mean, that's a tough profession, man.
Talk about an isolating
job. An isolating profession. But he comes up and he's had a few. So he's, kind of, off in his own little land and starts,
let's go back to my truck, baby.
Yep. And finally he's like, so what do you do? And he's like, I'm a trucker. I'm like, no kidding. I said, did not peg that, but okay. And he starts, he's like, so, what do you do? And I'm like, oh,
Yeah.
this'll be fun.
This is fun. Yeah.
And I'm just like, oh, I'm a pastor. He's like, holy fucking shit. It's like, oh. And the bartender, she's back there and she's witnessing this whole thing. And she's just like, really?
Yeah, you cussed at her.
Really? Yeah. She's like, she just told you she's a pastor and your response is to swear out. I died laughing. I was like,
that's amazing. I'm sure you get that often.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Well, and then he kind of had to, I don't swear at me all that much. It's usually
maybe just some like recoil of disgust or...
Usually the response is an immediate explanation of why they haven't gone to church in a long time.
Right. A confession.
Yeah. A confession.
Yes. Usually it's, you tell somebody you're a pastor and they're like, oh yeah, I haven't been to church in a while because I have X, Y.
Like you can tell by looking at them or something.
Right.
Like you're looking into their soul.
I don't know why.
Well, she speaks for God, so they're hoping that she's going to relay this information. Can you tell the big man that I've been a little busy, I have my reasons.
And you're just going to look at them and usually I'm like, okay.
I don't care. Yeah.
I'm like, I'm not the church police.
That's right. Exactly. That's why I usually tell people that I'm an accountant instead of a therapist, because there's always some response.
Oh, that's brilliant. Then they may want to tell you all their issues. Lord.
My father's was doctor, and
yeah. Can you take a look at this
Like,
mole? I've got this thing.
He was like, well, I made an appointment.
Exactly. I'm not giving you free therapy. Yes. Oh my gosh. So your story, so are you originally from Nebraska? Is that right? Is that where family is?
I'm from Lincoln, yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I was born in Missouri, but we moved when I was like a year old. So as far as I'm concerned, I'm a Nebraskan.
But still, small Midwest to then head to Hollywood.
Yeah.
So, tell us a little bit about that.
So my poor mother.
Yeah.
They were not happy about the fact that I decided to pick up and move to California.
A big dangerous town.
Big dangerous, scary town. Now, to be fair, I had traveled a lot. My parents, my dad was like I said, he was a doctor, but he was also a private pilot. So we went on lots of vacations all over the United States. So I traveled. So it's not like I hadn't ever been to big cities or anything like that. Sure. But had I actually lived in something bigger than Lincoln, Nebraska prior to that? No, I had not. So it was a culture shock, and it was a little bit.
I can only imagine.
Yeah, it was a little bit of okay. This is different. But
so we wear our vaginas out here in this town.
Exactly. My mother was really afraid that was what was going to happen. I apparently was going to become either a porn star or a prostitute on Sunset Boulevard. And
well, I mean, that's what happened to Pretty Woman, but it all turned out great in the end for her.
Exactly.
Not so much with your story, unfortunately, as we'll get to. But
I'll tell you, I was like, I had a lot of incentive to prove my mother wrong.
Yes. Yes, for sure.
So, obviously there's a lot of stuff that doesn't make it in the book. Because trying to keep it to 70 to 80,000 words. So when I first
and trying not to get sued,
and trying not to get sued, it's always helpful.
True.
You got to be careful what you say about Disney. It worked for them. But it was when I first moved out there, I had no job, no money, nothing. I just was like, hey, went to a temp agency. And my first job working for this temp agency was wild. I didn't know any of the programs that you were supposed to know. So they were like, well, we can hire you to answer phones here. And I was like, all right, I'll do that.
Sure.
And so, I mean, there were some real interesting things. You got people that would come in for temp jobs that would have their resumes written on crayon, on crayon and things like that. And you're like, okay. But no, I was working for these two ladies who they were interesting to say the least. One of them had a dog named Winston. That I kind of became her almost personal assistant, sort of, kind of. And she took this dog everywhere.
The woman or the dog? Or both?
Yes.
Okay, got it.
The problem was Winston did not like to be picked up or touched by anybody but his mama. But
sure.
She would take him wherever she would go, so she would get in the car and plop him on my lap. And
nice.
I'm supposed to...
protect Winston from dying while goes, in travel.
Yeah,
sure.
while she goes into the grocery store or wherever where the dog can't go. Anyway,
that sounds very California.
Very, very California. So what wound up happening one day was I was at the office, and of course she had the dog at the office, which no problem. I take my dog to the office. It's not a big issue. But we wanted to order food one day, and so we are ordering from I think it was either Chinese or Vietnamese. I'm not sure which. But we're ordering some things, and there was a little bit of a language barrier trying to get across what we wanted. And she wanted me to get just some chicken for the dog. So I'm trying to explain
plain old chicken,
just some grilled chicken, whatever, however you prepare chicken, and they kept going, oh, do you want soy sauce? And I was like, no, I don't want soy sauce with that. Just chicken. I said, and finally I was like, it's for the dog. Okay. It's just some chicken for the dog. And they're like, oh, you want dog? And I was like, no. Slam.
That's an option? I thought that wasn't real. I think that was real.
I lost it. I just phone down. I was just like, we're not ordering from there.
Oh no.
I was like, no, we're not ordering from there. Now, Disney wound up, or Hollywood wound up being a good lesson in not what you know, who you know.
Sure.
It really,
absolutely,
it really became one of those kinds of situations where the only reason I got in where I got in was I wound up temping in the vice president and president's office over at Disneyland International. And kind of the Hollywood, kind of the Hollywood thing when you're a temp is you just grab a book and you go and you sit at a desk and you read for, however many hours and you pick up your paycheck and whatever. You're just there to man the phones or whatever. I did never do that. Midwestern work ethic. I don't know what it was exactly, but I would show up and be like, okay, what am I supposed to do, for this job? And they were kind of like,
what? Why are you working?
Yeah. They were like,
we just need a warm body, lady.
Yeah. They're like, where's your book? So the vice president kind of was like, well, I've got this expense account. And I was like, oh, I've been learning Excel.
Oh my gosh.
I didn't know Word or Excel. This was the thing that I used that temp agency for, was to hone my skills in Word and Excel. And then for like 11 months, I went on a temp job playing video games where I did not need to know either Word or Excel. So I was really glad that
Another amazing job. I know you say it kind of could get kind of monotonous or whatever,
it was a little monotonous. I mean, it's kids' things.
Yeah.
But
playing games all day.
Yeah,
that's like,
it was difficult trying to crash the program. I learned some things. I learned that the way you say tic-tac-toe in Spanish is gato y gato. which I thought meant cat.
Cat.
Right.
Yeah.
So I flagged it as like, oh, this is wrong because, the one language thing I know.
One word. Cat and cat.
I'm like, one language thing I know. I'm like, this has to be wrong. This is talking about cats. It's supposed to be tic-tac-toe. And like, one of our language experts is like, no, that's how we say tic-tac-toe. And I was like, oh, okay.
No,
learn something.
Okay. Bummer. Yeah, right.
Yeah. So I did Disney Interactive for a while. Again, kind of weird and wild. Some of the people you meet, doing stuff like that,
like Elton John's husband.
Well, that was at feature animation.
Oh,
yeah, that was when I was at animation. Yeah,
quit jumping ahead, Brittany.
Yeah,
my gosh, that's amazing.
Like, I don't even think I registered who I was talking to for a long time. It was just like, oh, hey, this guy named David Furnish, and he had a project with Rocket Pictures that he was trying to, get through with me. I probably can't talk too much about what that project was. I don't know that it ever came to fruition. I don't think Rocket Pictures is even around anymore. But anyway, he would call up constantly, because he had to talking to my boss or whatever. And so he'd call and he'd be like, hey, Rebecca, how you doing? Blah, 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 in his lovely British accent, which I'm not going to try and emulate. And
we love the British too much to
I love the British too much to try and give them my terrible attempt at an accent. And Southern I can pull off. British, it's hit or miss. I got to practice a little bit, and I haven't.
Right.
But anyway, he would call and just, hey, how you doing? Da, 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 da.
That's lovely.
Hey, I suppose you want to talk to my boss, and he's like, oh yeah, if she's around, blah blah blah, and so it was just kind of one of those things, and it took a while for me to even realize who he was.
Who he was.
Yeah.
Yes.
It was like all of a sudden I was like, oh, wait a minute. I was like, he's married to Elton John.
I know. Yeah.
Like
that's a big deal.
He spends like most of his time with Elton John.
That's amazing.
Which makes sense. Elton John did a lot of work for Disney, Lion King soundtrack,
Yes,
sure.
Of course we have that connection with him, but it just, was, it took me a while to
that's
realize
great.
who I was even on the phone with.
Yeah. So your book really, so there's a few things that I loved about the book. First was that it centers, there's this thread of fairy tales that's kind of going through it and your artwork. And I thought that was really fascinating how you brought it back to not just fairy tales, not like the fairy tales we know,
right,
but the disturbing original fairy tales.
Yes.
That I was like, okay, now I got to go back and reread all of these.
So my job
stories
at Disney Animation was to read stuff. It was to read a lot of fairy tales, scripts, books, whatever, folklore, all of that, mythologies, all that kind of stuff. You could sit there. I remember when I first started, I was always like, I was a huge Greek mythology person. So Hercules comes out, and I'm like, this is not. I was like,
this is not
the
story of Hercules. Yeah. What are you guys doing? This is ridiculous. How dare you? And somebody kind of looked at me, and they're like, well, do you really think that we ought to be telling the story of how he goes mad and kills his children, and then put that on screen? And I'm like, oh, good point.
Yeah, no, right. You can't tell the original story.
Yeah, I was like, oh, that's not really. So I had to do a little bit of shift in thinking where I was like, oh, the point isn't to tell like the story as it was originally told. The point of the story was to make it palatable to little children.
But I loved how you talked about that. That's what we do to the Bible so often. That these original stories that are mythical.
Ark, nice little rainbow.
So pretty. Yeah. Of little animals.
Oh, and by the way, mass genocide.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah, most of the cute little bunnies and squirrels drown.
Yeah.
Most of the Unless we brought them aboard for the lions to eat,
Well, I mean, never happened to the unicorns.
Right.
That's right.
The lions ate them.
Oh. Bye-bye,
Exactly.
Thumper.
Yeah. Bye-bye. Yeah, no.
But the real life stories are so much more disturbing, which is
they
what
really are.
you
Yeah.
talk about your own life story, and that it did not turn out to be the fairy tale. You did not marry the
It
Prince
was
Charming.
not the Disney-fied version where everything
No.
works out in the end. No.
Yeah. So can you tell us a little bit about that story?
Um,
This crazy
Yeah, my
nightmare
nightmare.
of a story.
Right.
Yes.
And to be honest, as nightmarish, my caveat here is as nightmarish as my story was, when I start hearing some other people's stories too, it's just like, I'm like, I had it good.
Sure.
In comparison.
But it was a nightmare to you.
It was a nightmare to me.
Yeah.
Because I had never really been introduced to that level of psychopathy,
Right.
sociopathy. It was just completely outside my realm.
Right.
And I fully admit I lived a privileged life. I lived a very, very privileged life. And so I didn't ever spend a lot of time seeing some of the darker sides of humanity, so to speak. I was
Right.
fairly sheltered in that
Yeah.
regard. Even living in Hollywood and whatever. Yeah, you saw stuff, but and believe me, I saw a lot of stuff. But it was never stuff that was a part of, my everyday life kind of thing.
Right.
Right. Not an intimate
No.
partner.
Yeah.
Right.
And not that I didn't have manipulative types of relationships prior to that. They all were. I start seeing those patterns looking back. I'm like, oh, wow. Yeah, that was probably not the best person to be involved with.
But pathological narcissism is a whole different
It
beast.
is. And
Yes.
I had no idea what I was getting into. Just, none.
Sure.
Because, and that was the thing I think that was so
Most people
hard.
don't go yippity skipping
Right.
into
Right.
narcissistic relationships.
What was so hard
Right.
was the people, like I
Yeah.
had one friend who used to always be like, you were so smart. How did you get into this? And I'm like, your
Right.
intelligence doesn't matter when it comes to this. It doesn't. It doesn't.
Right.
I say this all the time, that if you,
Yeah.
like when you think about narcissism, being in a relationship with a narcissist is really like getting into a cult.
Yes.
And you don't know that it's happening. It's this
Right.
slow drip of manipulation that you don't often see. Some people around you can see it and they're like, girl, run.
Right.
But you're
Yeah.
like, it doesn't.
It was
Right.
It's crazy
It feels
making.
good. I feel loved.
exactly. It was the
I
love
feel
bombing.
accepted.
Love bombing. Yeah.
And like I said, being a female pastor was not the easiest, being an introverted female pastor was not the
Sure.
easiest thing in the world in terms of dating. Because,
Right.
it's not like I had problems before. It was, but just for kicks and giggles, I had to add the added element of, and you're a pastor. And so,
Right.
Yeah.
so I was pretty
You
much,
mean a lot of people don't find women pastors real sexy, and they're like, I want what you got
although
under
I
that
will
robe.
say,
That's right.
there are those that have the fetishes.
They have the kinks.
Oh,
That's
sure.
They
right.
have the kink,
Yeah.
and it's really bizarre
Yeah.
and weird. And I'm like, okay, yeah, no, bye.
You mentioned that,
Right.
in the book of like,
Yeah.
hey, this would be a fun role play
Yeah,
or whatever. Gross.
yeah. I had one guy who he thought it'd be really cool to set up some kind of like an OnlyFans page of the the lady pastor or whatever. And I was,
What? Oh my gosh.
You
Hey,
make a
don't
lot of
knock
money.
it till you try it.
I know. Make a lot of money.
I was like, nope, bye bye, swipe left.
Come to confession, boys.
Tell me all your secrets.
Oh, I'll make you clean again.
White as snow.
Question, of course, being so. How do you how do you date?
Yeah.
Because obviously my attempts to go out in the world and meet
Yeah.
people at bars wasn't working so well.
No.
And so I had turned to online dating. I'd been doing that actually for a while with marginal success. I mean, I
Yeah.
had gone out and I actually had a couple of boyfriends that I dated for, a few months here and there
Sure.
that ultimately didn't work out. But it was that moment where, there was somebody he was asking me questions and it wasn't, lack of a better term, it wasn't sexual. It was, very much at that point in time, just questions about what I do, what I believe. We would actually get into kind of, he was non-denominational. So we had a little, difference of opinion on some things. And so he tapped into what I was attracted to, which was the intellect part of it.
Sure.
It was,
Yeah.
I can have a conversation with this person. It's not just,
Yeah.
all about,
Same.
yeah.
Same for me.
Yeah.
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 So, I mean, that was my immediate draw. Was he tapped in immediately to what I found attractive in someone was
Yeah.
was the intellect part of it and having those discussions. And so he would go out of his way to go do things I liked to do. In fact, like our first date, when we were talking, and he, said he had never watched Monty Python, and in my world, I was like, I'm not sure we can keep.
What?
Yeah, I was like, I'm not sure we can keep dating.
Yeah.
I'm like, this may be the first and only. So he was.
I'm throwing you on that pile of dead when the guy comes by with the cart. Yeah.
So he was like, hey, after we got done with dinner, which was, a very pleasant dinner, and, we had steak and wine. It was, it was Nebraska. We had steak.
Yeah. Cow on every plate.
We had prime rib for dinner. So
Nice.
it was, he was like, let's go watch, this movie you talked about. And I was like, okay.
Huh. Yeah.
Oh.
Thoughtful.
Flashback to high school, college days, where I go to visit. I was staying at my parents' place, and they were, I don't know where they were. They were probably, on vacation somewhere or whatever. I just happened to be there by myself for a doctor's appointment. And so I was like, all right, well, I normally don't, let a guy I just met don't know where I live, but hey, this seems like,
Right.
it's not actually where I live, it's where my parents live. So.
Yeah.
Right. So,
So,
if anybody's getting
you know,
murdered,
Yeah, right.
Right.
yeah, it's fine.
You only stand to benefit. I'm sure you're an heir.
I feel so
It's
bad
fine.
for them. They're really wonderful people, and I do such terrible things to them. But anyway, so we watch or whatever, we're done, and and he's like, yeah, this is fun, let's do this again sometime. And I'm like, yeah, okay, sure, sounds great. Like our next time we went to like Dave and Buster's or something like that, and we went to a vineyard. We went, we did all these things that he just was paying attention to.
Yeah.
And I hadn't had that happen in like forever. I was like, wow.
Yeah.
Someone like actually cares
Yeah.
what I want and what
Right.
I think. So
Right.
you get sucked into this thinking
Yes.
they actually care about you, and they're paying
Yeah.
attention, and they're paying attention because they like you.
Yeah.
Little did
It's
I
just
know.
a very good game.
It is.
Yeah.
Yes.
Mhm.
And so on the one hand, I was the perfect target, and on the other hand, I was very different from most other targets because
Yeah.
they do go for the empathy. But a lot of times, at least in his case, he had always dated people that he could he could bring some kind of doubt upon their character. So if they accused him of something, he would be able to bring something up that, he could say, well, you don't believe this person really, because this is what they do. Like one
Right.
of his ex-girlfriends, I think, was a stripper or something. And so it was, whatever. See, and this is always
Right.
a big problem. I'm always like, no judgment, no judgment. I'm like, no, I need to be more judgy. Like I gotta learn to be more judgy.
Character
When you're
issues.
dating. Yeah, when you're
you know.
dating.
I gotta learn to
absolutely.
be more judgy. And so that's, kind of what I came out of that is I need to learn to be more judgy with people. When they start telling me things and I'm like, yeah, nope, bye.
Right.
And so it was a situation where he needed me. He needed me financially. He came off as, he's like, oh yeah, no, I just quit my job because I'm gonna, kind of, technically I'm retired or whatever. I'm going to spend some time at home doing some, stuff with my house, blah, blah, blah. Little did I know that the house was like, in foreclosure. So he'd been fighting with a mortgage company for some time over this. And before we ever met, he had gotten himself into some trouble with the feds because he made some death threats.
Oh, shit.
You can't.
Yeah. Death threats to HUD officials, which, you're like,
oh my God.
If you say federal
Not a
employee,
good idea.
it's like technically they're a federal employee. So it was, it was a federal felony.
Yeah.
Right. It was, and I mean, it was creepy type stuff. Like he, the way he threatened this one particular person. I mean, he threatened a lot of people, but this one particular person, the way he threatened them was to send them an email with their home address in it saying, one day you will find me sitting in your home with your wife and children.
Oh my God.
Okay. Yes. These are not
psychopath.
Just vague threats.
Oh, holy crap.
Yeah.
Now, was that happening before you were married to him, or
yes? That was like 5 years before we met.
Now, did he still do it when you were married? Because you were married and then they were coming after him, right?
Well, when we got married, so we got married in October, but apparently he went like in September. And in September had made a plea deal with these charges because he didn't really want me finding out everything. So he made a plea deal.
So you didn't even know that he was involved in any legal matters?
No, not at
prior to getting married.
The time. I did know that there had been some issues with his mortgage company and he had gotten into some trouble, but he downplayed what it was.
Sure, he spun it his way.
It was a misdemeanor. It was something from 5 years ago. Whatever. I had no idea that this whole, really what he had done, where this, all was.
The feds are after you.
The feds are after me, kind of.
Little different than the speeding ticket or whatever.
Yeah, exactly.
He was trying to spin it as.
So he did the plea deal basically to keep from having this go to trial, and they pled him down to a misdemeanor. So technically, it was a misdemeanor.
Okay.
It started out as a felony, but they pled him down to a misdemeanor, which is really weird in federal court. I discovered through all this process that a federal misdemeanor is bizarre. They're like, that never happens. They're like, nobody gets a federal misdemeanor. What is this? Like when we talk to attorneys, they'd be like,
he was just that good, that charming, and could work it out.
Yep. So I was so on the one hand, I knew there was kind of something, but it didn't seem like it was a big deal. And then there was the reality of what actually was going on, and that he was doing 5 years of probation, and that he was supposed to be monitored, like his computer was
the ankle.
Well, the ankle monitor came in later. He was originally supposed to be computer monitoring because everything he did, his threats were either email. So they wanted to monitor his email. So of course he was always going out and finding computers that they couldn't monitor. But
good Lord.
He was not filling out the paperwork and he wasn't doing what he was supposed to be doing for this computer monitoring. And so apparently he was in violation of his probation after we got married. And I knew nothing about that.
Wow.
I'm like,
Goodness. Yeah.
don't know anything about it.
Rebecca, you were such a perfect target
Yeah.
because your position as a pastor elevated him to, I must, people will see me as blameless because I'm the husband of a pastor.
He would use my title so often.
I bet he would. You were the money.
When he would
Cha-ching.
start screaming into the phone at somebody or whatever, he would be like, "My wife's a pastor," and it was like,
yeah, exactly. Yep.
I was like, "Don't drive me into this."
Yeah.
Yeah. That is so true, Kristen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
It did. Well, and it did.
Yeah, because it's with narcissists, it's only they're only interested in what benefits them directly.
Yeah.
So you were just a device, that would benefit him to elevate him in some way.
Right.
So
yeah, that's exactly what it was. I was a shield. Number one, I had my own house. I had my own money. And given he was, I thought he was like really willing to move to where I was living. We lived 3 hours apart when we first started dating.
Okay.
And he was really willing to move there really fast.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
The faster, the better, because then you don't find out anything. Yes. My ex was also a narcissist. Yes. Fast. As fast as we could get this done.
Well, we met and married in 5 months.
Yeah.
So did we.
Yep.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Oh, those narcissists.
We were engaged.
I'm sure it took Rebecca a little.
We were
I was going to say.
Yeah, we were.
Probably took you a little longer because you didn't live near each other. Yeah.
Right. There were some technical difficulties in terms of.
Sure.
So, and also, being a pastor, you don't live with your boyfriend. That's
right.
That's how would you do? So there were some. He wanted to move to Kearney, but he wanted to move, and there really aren't a lot of places there to just rent. It's not a good place to just rent an apartment. And so it was like, and of course, when he was like, yeah, I'm going to move there, I was sort of like, oh, okay. I guess.
You weren't even engaged at that point?
I guess we're serious. Yeah, we weren't engaged.
Oh, Lord.
Do that.
Okay.
Which is why we got engaged, because it was like, well, if you're going to, and I was like, well, if your plan is you're going to come here and basically for me to live, I was like, well, and we were 38 years old at the time, which he would.
Yeah. Tick, tick, tick.
Yeah.
The clock is ticking.
Yep. That was kind of that whole chapter of my, that is the ticking clock is a big thing, tick, tick, tick. There it goes. And I wanted kids.
Yeah.
He wanted more kids. He had a daughter. And
that poor sweet thing.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds like that was complicated. Because
it was complicated. I failed her, but at the same time, pretty much anyone who knows the situation is like there was nothing you could have done. I came in way too late.
Yeah.
And
that's tough.
It was
I just meant poor sweet thing, child being born
into that
to him
to a narcissist.
Yeah,
because
for sure.
the mother wasn't
you don't come away unscathed.
Yeah. The mother wasn't really much better, and I'd actually never met the mother, to be honest. I never met her mom. If she didn't show up for a graduation, nothing.
Nice.
Yeah. So I mean,
so he moved to your small town.
Yeah. So he moves to my small town, and it's of course, well then, okay, we need to get married.
Yeah. I mean, if we want to have sex, we have to get married.
Exactly.
So we got to do this fast.
This is what's going to happen. We got to get married because that's how this is going to work. And so we got engaged, and he moved his daughter in with me while he was living elsewhere. Which
that's interesting.
craziness.
And that about did it. That about did it in. That about was like the end of it. But again, master manipulator. Every time
this will work out.
Every time I got cold feet and would be like, you know what? I don't think I can do this. I'm. He was.
I mean, and not just cold feet. It was probably just good intuition of like, I don't think this is right. It doesn't feel right. I don't have peace about this.
Narcissists do.
Yeah.
Narcissists.
So, I knew
they can convince you to ignore your intuition.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Because that's what coercive control is all about.
Yeah. Yes. I knew it was not going to be a good situation. I knew it was not going to be, this was not going to work out. What I kept telling myself, and of course, at this point, I think the problem is the daughter. I don't think he's the problem.
Well, he's probably spun it that way, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. No, she's the one with the dissociative disorder. She's the one with, this. And she didn't help her cause. I mean, we'll just put it that way. She was
a teenager.
She was a little over the top teenager. I'm just there's teenager because I worked with youth, I worked with, and she was kind of another level, but given, sort of the hindsight, given
traumatized and
what she went through, I get it now. I'm like, I totally understand why she was the way she was. And quite frankly, I mean, I'm not going to say too much, about her because it's her story and whatever, but she has done phenomenal work on herself.
Good.
Since
that's wonderful to hear.
In spite of me, and it did break my heart when she reached out at one point and was like, why didn't you take me with you? And I was like,
no.
No. I was like, because that never entered my mind, number one.
And I couldn't have, honey.
I was like, number one, you weren't my kid.
Yeah.
Right.
And number two, you didn't ever even express any desire to like be with me instead of your dad. That just never, that never entered the conversation. That never was something that I would have in a million years thought she would have even wanted to have happen. So it was that shocked me.
Yeah.
But anyway, point being, so we get into this situation, we get married, and I mean, I had like a panic attack the day before my wedding with my matron of honor. We were at breakfast and I was just like, okay, I've got really cold feet. I was like, I was like,
can't do this. Yeah.
I'm like, I'm really nervous about this. But I don't think even then I was putting together that part of my anxiety was him in general. It was the situation. And, I just kind of kept thinking, well, she's 17, she'll be 18, and then she's going to go to college and, I can get through it.
Right.
I can do anything for a year or two. You tell yourself those
right.
Things.
And I think about how this, sits in our spirit about like all of these lies, all this dark stuff that was going on behind the scenes that I think we pick up intuitively, right? And it's just like, there's something, I can't put my finger on it, but something feels off.
Right.
And, for you to, once you were married, for it to all come out.
Yeah. Well, and the first time I really witnessed the narcissistic rage, and this was the interesting part about when we were married, because he needed me, it was rarely directed at me.
Right.
He manipulated me, but he didn't usually make me the target of his rage.
Yep. My ex didn't either.
Yeah. It was always
somebody
else.
About the only target.
Yeah.
Me and the kids were the main
my
target.
children were, but not me, because he needed me.
His daughter was definitely a target for his rage. And the first time I witnessed it, he was on the phone with, I don't know, it was a credit card company or something. I don't know what it was anymore. It was just this like verbal vomit that just like a constant screaming, into the phone, that, whoever was on the other line had no opportunity to even reply or respond or whatever.
Right.
Because it was just this word salad being thrown at them just so quickly, rapidly, loudly, abusively. And I walked in and just like my eyes got like this, and I was just like, what is going on?
Right. This is a different person.
Right.
Like who has just come out, right? If you think about like a serial killer, I'm a big into, true crime and serial killers and stuff, but they talk about like something comes over them that they can't control. And
that is
that's
absolutely it. And I always say that it was always like, and his eyes would change color.
Yes, they do.
Isn't that crazy?
They get dark.
Creepiest thing. They like get darker. I mean, literally,
they get black.
Like he had kind of hazelish eyes, but when he was in that mode, they were almost black. I mean, it would just.
If you haven't seen it, it's hard to like. Hard. People are like, that doesn't happen. They're like, that doesn't. It happens.
It happens.
Yes.
Right. They portray it in TV and movies, but you kind of think, oh, that's just for dramatic effect.
Yeah.
No, that honestly happens.
Yeah.
It does. Yeah.
Yeah. No, it really, it was, and that was like the first time, I walked in on that. And I was
you're thinking, Jekyll and Hyde, what the hell have I just witnessed? Who is this person?
And then what really scared me about it was, so most of us, when we're that worked up, we rage for a little while when we're done. It's like, ding, those people, like whatever. And you're still in a bad mood. And you're like, look, I'm not mad at you, honey, but
your adrenaline's up and you're just.
He hung that phone up and it was just like, hi, honey, how are you?
Oh, that's so awful.
the collective.
I know.
Oh, psychopath right there. Because there's no real emotion behind it. It's all manipulate. Oh my
they
God.
Kiss me and like, hi, honey, how are you? And
how are you?
I was like, what the hell was that?
Yes.
I was like, what was that? Because
Rebecca, that's so scary.
That's not normal.
Yeah,
and
no.
I think the part that was so hard was how I wound up normalizing it, where it's just kind of like, yeah, that's just what he does.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Yes.
And
to the point where you're like, oh, that's just my everyday. And then you don't realize until you're finally out of it and away from it. You're like, oh, shit.
Yeah.
I was like seriously abused. Like that just became a part of my life.
Right.
So, I was so happy to see that you had compared it to Alice in Wonderland because there's this book called The Borderline Mother or something like that, where women who have borderline personality disorder, it's very close to narcissism, and some of it is very narcissistic. And
they all overlap.
Throughout that book, they describe it as Alice in Wonderland, where you're in this world that it's normal to all, like everybody in the world, but you're like, what is happening? And then suddenly it kind of feels normal after a while, but you're like,
well,
you begin to expect the unexpected.
Yes, exactly.
So can I read an excerpt from your book, or is that not allowed because it's not published yet?
No, go for it. Please do. Yeah.
Okay, so speaking of Alice in Wonderland, I had highlighted this, I think in chapter 15, which is the one on...
I have a couple Alice in Wonderland ones, so...
Yeah. Oh, Games with No Rules. Chapter 16.
Games with No Rules, yeah.
Yeah. You said, it's not an accident that several of my paintings deal with this topic of abuse and control, utilize Alice in Wonderland imagery.
Yeah.
Feminist scholars throughout the years have seen Alice as a complex female character who is both strong and assertive, and quote unquote underground image of a woman resisting the system. Mm-hmm. And yet is also subject to the male powers that surround her.
Yes.
Yeah, I had done some reading on some feminist scholarship on Alice in Wonderland, and I found it fascinating. I was like, "Oh, wow!"
Yeah.
It is fascinating.
And
Yeah.
and like one of them, I think had pointed out, and I don't have it in front of me, so I can't tell you who the author was off the top of my head, but I quoted in the book and I footnote it. But essentially, it's that when Alice goes in and she's given two choices: eat me, drink me.
Right.
Okay. Well, which does what?
What do
And
they
what does
do?
it do?
Right.
It's like what is so she doesn't have all the information she needs to make a good decision, but she's got to make a decision. It's like
I thought that was fascinating.
yeah.
I'm not able to make an informed decision. We're so often not able to make an informed decision. You were trying to make an informed decision, but you didn't have all of the information. This guy had just done a plea deal. So like you're trying to make an informed decision.
Yeah.
Yeah. You have to eat this or drink this. What's it going to be? What's it going to be? What's it going to be?
And
there's
so often then in the church,
away.
If you have married this person, now you are stuck because divorce is not an option. That's not on the table anymore. So now you're like, well, what am I supposed to do about this situation?
Right.
So
just be tortured unto death, essentially. Yeah. Tortured unto death.
Yeah.
So how long were you married to him?
I was so I was married to him for 2.5 years before I filed for divorce. It took me another 2 years to get divorced.
Sure.
Because
as it does.
And we didn't even have kids together. I'm like, it's just how he drug things out. He went through a couple of different attorneys because that's what he did. All that kind of stuff.
He will switch and motion after motion after motion. Yes.
And the attorney switched on him too.
Oh yeah. Well, when it finally winds up and the final straw, I'd say the final straw is he went to federal prison, except for the fact that they actually weren't going to send him. That for my sake, they were willing to keep him like in a federal holding facility because they don't actually have federal prisons in Nebraska. So they make like deals with county jails or whatever to hold them and blah, blah, blah. And they were going to do that. They were going to keep him like,
how nice.
Wahoo.
You're like, no, go ahead.
I could visit him.
That's fine.
Yeah. And, which is
so you could
kind of one of those situations where I'm sitting there going, how privileged and how, that.
Right.
That's crazy. Why am I getting special treatment?
Why is he getting special treatment?
Well, I mean, that he doesn't have to because of me, which was wild. And I couldn't. I was
send his ass away.
They were doing all this stuff, and quite frankly, I think they didn't send him away before out of deference to me because when the first time I walked into the courtroom when he'd been arrested. I mean, like everybody the court officials were treating me with kid gloves. Like the U.S. Marshals were all empathetic and like, we're so, and I'm like, I mean, I appreciated it, but I know most women don't get that treatment. That is not the treatment they get.
No, you carried the wrath of God on your shoulders.
I guess I did.
It's probably how they viewed you.
So, I mean, I fully admit that played into my favor big time.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
And I try to recognize that's not going to be every woman's experience when she's in a courtroom.
I thought you recognized that well.
Yeah.
I heard that because that is true.
And so, he totally used that. But when I filed for divorce, we were supposed to have this meeting with his attorney. My divorce attorney, it was like our first time we were supposed to kind of have a meeting with the attorneys. And we already knew he was in behind bars, but we get on that conference call and his attorney's like, look, I can't have this meeting because I can't consult with my client because they shipped him off to Leavenworth and I haven't been able to talk to him. And my attorney and I looked at each other and we're like, Leavenworth?
Yeah.
Nice.
We were like, wow. So my filing for divorce triggered them going, nope, we don't need to keep gloves on this one anymore. And
good.
I tipped him off and I was like, dang, I should have done that years ago. I was like,
Yeah.
wow, I really, really should have. But, like I said, I got so pulled into his wonderland, into this
Yeah.
weird reality where everything got so normalized. I felt he was the victim. I really did. I thought at some
Right.
point, I have
Yeah.
not seen all the stuff. I mean,
Yeah.
he was very careful and curated everything that I saw,
Yeah.
paperwork, all of that kind of stuff. Was very careful. Um, I just was not able to recognize that he was creating his own fantasy land.
Yeah, he
Mhm.
does, as they do. Yeah.
And part of it was also when I was talking, with like my mom or something, when I would talk about the narcissistic rage, because they never saw that. No one else,
Right.
would see
No,
that.
no. They
Yeah.
keep that for you.
And not that my parents cared for him, they really didn't. But when I would talk about it, I'd be like, well, you don't know how he talks to, like customer
Yeah.
service people. This is insane. And my mom would be like, well, sometimes, they can be infuriating and
Right.
sometimes they deserve to be
Yes.
that. And I was like, okay.
Right.
Yeah.
I know
it
so many people that
normalized it.
cared for me. And, I tried to explain to them what was going on behind closed doors in my home. And they'd be like, well, sometimes my husband will blah, blah, blah. Or, I would tell my mom and she's like, your dad and I had such a hard time the early years of our marriage and it gets better.
Right.
It gets better. You just got to stick with it.
Right.
Oh my God.
Very fortunate.
But the problem is that, like in my story, I hadn't ever even remotely mentioned it for 13, 14 years, right? I had lived in this in silence, except for maybe a therapist or two we had gone to, but I never talked to anybody about it except my sister. So then when I start talking about it, they're like, what are you talking about? You have the perfect marriage. Like, what? But he was a pastor and I was a pastor's wife.
Ooh.
We cannot talk about it. You can't talk about it to anybody.
No.
So
meanwhile, I'm telling everybody and nobody's believing me. Nobody's believing me because they know him.
Well,
or they think they know him. He's such a nice man.
He's such a good husband and father, and
he's a good provider, and he's friendly with the neighbors, and yes,
exactly.
Surely it's not as bad as you're making it out to be.
Now,
I'm playing the victim.
Yeah, I have to say, my parents, I would call them up, the first time he got arrested, and as far as my parents were concerned, it was like, why are you staying with him? They were like, what is the deal? Why are you staying him?
Well, I'm glad they changed their tune. Yeah.
And they basically they were just kind of like,
get away.
I called my mom up one time about something that I was really upset about, and she got real quiet, and she just finally went, you know what? I got to get off the phone. And I was like, okay. She goes, because you don't want to hear what I want to tell you. It was like, you don't want to hear it. Because what you wanted to tell me was get divorced. Get out. And
run.
I think she knew I wasn't quite ready to hear it, but I knew that's what she wanted to tell me. And I said, all I said to her was, I said, I know what you want to, I said, I know what you want to say. And I said, and I understand. And I thankfully I had people around me who were truth tellers, that would not hold back and that told me and would be like, we're really concerned about this. And so I was very grateful to have those people in my life. And I didn't ever get mad at them, because a lot of times what happens, when you tell a friend the truth like that, they'll turn on you and be like, oh, they're like, well, I'm going to choose my husband over you. And, I'm not going to, and I didn't do that. I knew where it was coming from. Maybe it's because I'm a pastor and, having those hard conversations. But I was like, no, I get it. I know why you're saying
I get it. Yeah.
And so my other word of advice is, if you can sit there and say, I'd be telling myself the same thing in that position, maybe you ought to listen to yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
What I tell people today, and what I try to do for myself, because I had learned for so many years, I was with my abuser for almost 15 years, to suppress my instincts, to completely suppress and
Yeah.
ignore all of my gut instincts, is now when I am feeling anxious or something doesn't feel right, I try to remove my head and my heart from the
Right.
situation and
Yeah.
just concentrate. What is my gut telling me? Because I can't trust my head. It's going to try to logic and override what I'm feeling.
and your
I
heart.
can't trust my heart because I'm like, but I'm in love. Or,
Right.
I want good for these people. I'm empathetic.
Well, I have that whole
And
chapter
so
on how your
you've got
heart
to give
overrides it.
grace. Yes. So now I'm just like, what does my gut say? Because my gut is never wrong. Turns out my
Yeah.
gut is never wrong. I
Never.
just had to learn. It's taken almost 10 years now, post-divorce, for me to finally figure out how to disengage my head and my heart and focus on
Tune
what
into
my
your body.
gut
When
is
you
saying and
Figure
follow
if
that.
you have a trick for that, let me know. Because
Mindfulness.
Yes,
Mindfulness practices.
We do. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good therapy
I
and
do.
some
I have
Yes.
done some of that in the past. I'm not as good as it right
Yeah.
now. As probably
Yeah.
some
Therapy
good body work.
and mindfulness and mhm.
Yep.
Absolutely.
Oh, and I'd have to give a shout out to my therapist at the time.
Good.
She was phenomenal. She was
Good.
amazing.
Good. Good.
Because
Love it.
because as a pastor, getting
Yeah.
divorced, I had my own theological issues to work through that, with
Sure,
that. It
of
wasn't
course.
just the
Sure.
emotion of it. It was also the theology behind it of like, can I do
Yeah.
this? Is this okay? And as much as
Yes.
I would have told abuse victims, yes, it's fine. It was different for me. It was different for
Right.
myself.
That's a hard one.
Yeah.
That's
It
a
is.
hard one.
She was
Yeah.
phenomenal in working through that because she had a very, very in touch spiritual kind of sense. I mean, she wasn't like a quote Christian counselor kind of thing. But she definitely had a spiritual side to what she did. And she was actually a member at a colleague of mine's church, and he was who recommended her. He's like, she's really good. And I was like,
Cool.
okay. Now I appreciated that, like, because originally we went as marriage counseling because things were
Right.
spiraling. Things were spiraling, and I was like,
Oh, the marriage counseling.
Yep.
to
We
marriage
tried that so many
counseling.
times.
And he did not want to go until I threatened. I just basically said, well, then fine. If she tells me to get divorced, I'm getting divorced. And he was like, oh, well. He goes,
Well, then I should probably go because she's going to think I'm so charming and I'll be able to.
Well,
Yeah.
it was more,
I need to intercede.
he was like, well, then she's
Yeah.
a crappy therapist if she tells you to get divorced. And I was like, well, then
Right, of
maybe you ought to
course.
come find out and
Yeah.
go to the therapy, or go to the
Oh,
counseling.
man.
And she was like, so your wife's a pastor and you're doing all this stuff that is really reflecting badly on her. She's a public figure. Don't you care what is happening to her?
You mean a little empathy?
Yeah. And his response was, oh, they're Christian. They have to forgive.
Yeah.
Holy shit, of course.
Yeah.
Of course.
And I was like, I'm sorry, what?
No, I don't care about how
And
this
then it
reflects
just so
on her.
happened that the next week when I went in, I went by myself because he got arrested that morning. So
Nice.
because long story, it's in the book of kind of what led to that. And I go in and she, and I told her, I said, he got arrested. And she's like, well, do you still want to have a session? She goes, we can no longer do marriage counseling if I meet with just you. I will
Right.
just become your therapist. And I
Right.
said, I think I'm good with that.
Yeah.
Yes.
I said, I think at this point I'm good with just you being my therapist. And she was like, she goes, okay, so I don't normally get here this fast, but you realize he's a sociopath, right? And
Yeah.
I was
Good.
just And that was the connection for me I needed. I mean, he
Oh,
had gone
praise
through
God.
all kinds of court-ordered stuff. He was diagnosed with the narcissistic personality disorder, but I didn't know what that meant. I had no clue what that was.
Right.
I mean, it's become much more prominent in, the past
currently
7-8 years to talk about it.
Yeah.
But back then, I had no clue.
You don't
No,
understand.
I'd never heard of it. Never heard of it until
was
after my divorce.
So he has a little bit of an inflated ego and some anger management issues, but we can work on that, right?
No.
The second she said sociopath, that was it. I was like, I can't fix that. I was like, there is no fixing that. That is not changing. That is never going to be different. This is my life if I choose to go down this, if I stay married to him, this is my life and this is what my life is going to be for the rest of my life.
Yeah.
Because
Rebecca, plug your book again for us. Title, publisher, when it's going to be released, where we can buy it.
It is called Once Upon a Nightmare, Through the Looking Glass of Narcissistic Abuse by Choir Publishing. And it is going to be released May 28th and will be available on Amazon.
Nice.
If you have Amazon Unlimited, it is available now.
Is it really?
Yes, I could get it with one click.
You can?
I think so. Yeah.
Rebecca's like,
what? Know that?
Wait a dang second. I better be getting royalties off of whatever's out there.
I'm sure you are. Yes, I'm sure you are. Yes, it is. Yeah, you can already find it on Amazon and you can pre-order it.
Really?
I was looking that up. So
I'm
that's great.
Seriously Googling, going to Amazon right
now.
Yeah, right. I gotta wait a second. The book is so good.
It is, Rebecca. There.
Yeah.
There's a Kindle version of it you can get.
The Kindle version, yes.
Wow.
$9.99. Or
you can pre-order with one click. You can pre-order the Kindle. That's about all you can do, it looks like.
You can pre-order the Kindle. Okay.
Yeah. You can pre-order the Kindle
version. All right.
Well, I have already recommended this to so many people. I mean, just first of all, that you are a female pastor is so refreshing. I know my little sister and her ex were getting into big theological debates. I mean, just first of all, being a female pastor is just sinful and terrible in some opinions. Mine upbringing, that's what it was.
Yeah.
And that you have these experiences. I think one of the most amazing things to me was your story of how the church supported you instead of shunned you, because that was my experience.
Right.
And that you had this community coming around you and saying, we will support you. We love you. How can we help you get through this? Instead of, well, you made your bed, sleep in it, shunning, which happens so often in the community. I thought was really a beautiful example of how it's supposed to work.
Right.
So that was really
really great. The one of the things that I, like on the back cover, my little synopsis, as I say, the ways that the church both helped and hindered, my recovery, because in one context, it was so supportive. It was so amazingly supportive of what I was going through. And I don't point this out in the book, and I probably should have. I made sure that even in all of this, that my ex had some access to pastoral care. We had a prison minister, and he was, because when he was lashing out or whatever, I was like, I'll get you. I said, you can't have this pastor,
me, but yeah.
Well,
or he really wanted the senior pastor that I worked with to come visit.
Oh, yeah, no, because he wanted to manipulate that person against you.
Oh, absolutely. And I was like, no, but I will send a pastor into you. I said, I will not deny you pastoral care, that kind of thing. And so I called up our prison ministry and I said, my husband's in jail. Could you please go see him? And he did. Well, got in there, and all he wanted to do, he was like, no, I want to talk to either, the senior pastor, I want to talk to the or the bishop.
Yeah, you're no help to me, mister.
Right. And when he couldn't get either of those things out of him, he got up and walked out. So
Yeah.
it's not about,
This isn't about spiritual care. This is about
not about
who I
spiritual
can
care.
use.
He did not need spiritual care.
No.
I should say he needed it. He did not want it.
No, thanks.
Yeah. So, I mean, yeah. So my community really, really supported me. But as I go into in the book, when I wind up having to take I had to take a new call. Okay, so they say your first year of divorce, don't make major life changes. Well, number one, I wasn't divorced yet. So I was still in the middle of the divorce because, it dragged on for two years.
Right.
And I had to move. I had to take a new job. I had to move far, far away because the synod I was in was kind of like, we don't think it's safe for you to stay here. So,
right.
Yeah, right.
Which we don't want your psychopath husband coming back here and
because
havoc
he was threatening them too, because that was lots of fun.
Yeah, of course.
And I mean, and so it's like, okay, so I moved 1,700 miles away, and that didn't really matter because he wound up moving there too. So, which, was its own. Yeah. I'm like, you can't run away from that because they will find a way to find you and find, but I mean, I was lucky he did not, he never actually came technically after me. Like, he never got in contact with me.
Right.
I don't know if
he's just be close to you.
Yeah. I think his intent may have been eventually to do that, but he got sidetracked by more legal issues. So and
crazy.
But no, it was.
But then you ended up working with another narcissist.
I did.
Yeah, I mean,
so it got crazy there too, and
right.
It just was sort of one of these situations where I was like, and in this case, I didn't have the same support. It was because they didn't know me. I was new. Now nobody knew me, and so it was kind of a, are you sure?
Yeah.
Are you sure? So I got to experience that side of it then too, where on the one hand, in my marriage, people believed me. On the other hand, I wasn't as believed. It was kind of like, well, maybe the problem's you. And it's like, okay.
Well, the narcissists seem to follow you wherever you go, Rebecca. So
it
must
you
be
see them
you
everywhere now.
Yep.
And
villainizing everyone.
Yeah. And
yes.
Yeah.
Well, but I talk about this a lot with many different clients, is that especially if you were raised in the church or raised in religion, and not even just that, sometimes it just happens in families, but that we can become so codependent. I just want to be the hands and feet of Christ. I'm just going to help everybody around me. Right. So we become so codependent. I think women are socialized to be codependent. And you had mentioned that, like, this is the thing that I do, right? I'm just going to help people. I'm going to fix things. I can do that. I'm so good at that. Right.
Yep.
But that codependency and these passive codependent women, are what narcissists are attracted to, because we're going to help you. I'm so good at helping. So yes, is it our fault? Kind of, in a way, until we learn how to change some of those things. But yeah, it can become a pattern that we just easily fall into.
Yeah.
So often.
Yeah. And and like I said, I think it's one of those things where people don't, like I said, I was lucky. He went publicly crazy, is the way I put it.
Right. So everybody was seeing it.
Everybody saw it. Everybody knew what was going on. I mean,
right. And that's not usually the case.
12 federal marshals show up at your place of work and arrest you, and it's around town quick.
Right. Especially in a church. Yeah.
It gets around town pretty quick.
That gets around town.
I mean, I was in that phase of being like, oh my gosh, they, when I had to send a letter out, I didn't tell them what happened. I was just like, we're getting divorced. Please respect our privacy, kind of thing. And I'm like, people are going to be like, you're doing what? How dare you? And no, it was like the exact opposite of that. I was getting these phone calls from these women going, yeah, that happens. And,
Yeah, you okay?
and like there was one lady who came in. She didn't talk to me, but she talked to my administrative assistant. And she came in and she's like, yeah, I heard the story of how he went over to the Wells Fargo and started just throwing things at people. And I was like,
Oh my God.
I hadn't heard that story. I'm sorry, what?
Yeah, and no one
Yeah.
bothered to tell me because
Yeah.
Exactly.
boy.
Exactly.
Boy.
Okay, did not know that.
Wow.
And then I was starting to go through stuff, and I found out that his therapist, the people he went to that diagnosed him, had a restraining order against him.
Oh,
The psychiatrist's
no.
office had a restraining order against him. I didn't know this.
Wow.
I had no
Wow.
idea.
Oh my Lord.
Goodness.
So all the fun things you find.
Really, narcissists, if you can get them diagnosed, which most of the time you can't, because they won't go anywhere near.
Yeah, they got to get
someone who's
arrested,
gonna
and it has
call
to
it
be
out.
court. Yeah.
Yeah, but they should be on a registry like sex offenders.
Warning.
They should be on a registry.
Warning,
Yeah.
narcissist, stay away, sociopath, bye-bye. Nope.
Yep.
Do not pass go.
No.
Yeah, no, I wish there
Wow.
was, because you do. They need to come with a warning label that's like, yeah.
Well, the warning label is our intuition.
Yeah.
That's how we know, right? Like you said, it is so easily, we feel it. We have the warning system, but we're so often like discounting it.
My big
And the other part
is,
feels so good. The love bombing feels so good. So your dopamine is so spiked that you're not paying attention.
and I'll be honest, I don't trust
signs.
myself anymore. I'm like, I don't trust my own intuition. I'm like, I'm like, okay, I got this one really wrong. And I've gotten others really wrong too. So I'm like, I think, I'm like, there's something wonky on my radar that's
right.
Problematic, because, a lot of people, they're like, well, I don't trust anyone anymore. And I'm like, well, I don't trust myself. And that's scary.
That's different. That's a different level.
Yeah.
And that's where the community can be so helpful when, I had my tribe of badass women around me. That's what I called them, who were, I was like, what do you think about this one? And they, girl, run. Okay. Well, then I probably should. Yeah. Because I don't trust myself either.
And the problem is I'm such a private person that, like, I don't even let people know that I'm really dating anyone until it's probably too late. Because again, fishbowl, and it's one of those you don't
exactly.
Yeah. Living in the fishbowl.
Exactly.
It's by the time your friends meet them, you're already emotionally involved with them. So I'm like, okay, how do I
we just don't date anymore.
How do I just, if I really don't, it's like, how do you disconnect that and be like, okay, I need my friends to like meet this person like right away before I get emotionally connected to them, so that they can be, so that they can be like yes or no,
Absolutely. And there's nothing wrong with that.
I got to set up an interview system with my friends before I go out on dates.
Right. And always share your location. Exactly.
Always.
Well, Rebecca, this has been lovely. We don't want to keep you forever, but I mean, we could do this for hours, but God, your story is amazing.
If you ever want me to come back on, I got lots of things to talk about. No.
I bet you do. Yeah.
So great.
So happy to be a guest again sometime if you ever want
Thank
that.
Thank you. So. Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much for joining us
today.
Thank
you for having me on. It's been fun. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Has been. You're very welcome.
Yes.
Kristen, do you want to say anything else?
No.
Kristen?
We're done.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I've got so many thoughts in my head, but
I know.
No need to go off on a tangent after we've said our goodbyes. Yeah.
Okay.
No.
Yeah. Well, again, thank you, ladies. This has been wonderful.
All right. Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks so much.
Talk to you later.
Bye.
Bye.